If you're shopping while working, eating, or even listening to this podcast, then you know and love the thrill of a deal. But are you getting the deal and cash back? Rakuten shoppers do. They get the brands they love, savings, and cash back. And you can get it too. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Levi's, Plow and Hearth, Adidas, Sephora, and Neiman Marcus. Stack sales on top of cash back and feel what it's like to know you're maximizing the savings. And it's easy to use. And you get your cash back sent to you through PayPal or check. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cash back. Download the free Rakuten app or go to Rakuten.com to start saving today. It's the most rewarding way to shop. That's Rakuten. Rakuten.com.
You'll get more than you expect with McValue at McDonald's. Like deals on your late night go-tos when the party goes till dawn. And savings on their faves. So date night always passes the vibe check. Plus, when the fam shows up for the weekend, you can show out for breakfast.
Buy one breakfast sandwich, add one for $1. Only in the app. Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid once a day. Must opt into rewards. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Should Canada send troops into Ukraine? That possibility is not being ruled out by Prime Minister Mark Carney, who made a trip to Kyiv this weekend for Ukraine's Independence Day. He suggested Canada could contribute a military presence in the country in order to help efforts to maintain a ceasefire if Russia and Ukraine agree to one.
In Canada's judgment, it is not realistic that the only security guarantee could be the strength of the Ukrainian armed forces in the medium term. So that needs to be buttressed, it needs to be reinforced.
Carney also used the trip to outline the details of a $2 billion military aid package that was committed to at the G7 in Alberta. He says it will help purchase drones, armored vehicles, and other munitions for the Ukrainian army. But on this security guarantee operation, it's not quite clear what Canada's role could be. Discussions about what happens after a ceasefire have been underway for 2 years. And our country's been working with allies in a coalition of the willing about what protections can be given by land, air, and sea. Those other allies include many European countries, as well as Japan and Australia, but not the United States. So, can our military handle a mission like this right now? How long would the operation last, and how risky could it get? I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm trying to get answers to those questions from Christian Leuprecht, a professor at the Royal Military College and editor of the Canadian Military Journal. Christian, thanks very much for being here.
My pleasure.
There's a possibility on the table of Canadian troops being on the ground in Ukraine. Is our military prepared and able to do an operation like this?
Well, that is a billion-dollar question. So here's why. First, it's going to be a zero-sum game because currently we do not have the people, the equipment, or the money to engage in this type of a mission. So it means the Prime Minister would effectively be committing to pulling Canadian troops out of somewhere else, most likely in Latvia, since we have a brigade-size strength there, to redeploy at least some of those troops to Ukraine. That would also mean a multi-year engagement in Ukraine, probably likely close to what we did during the Cold War. We may be there for decades. And in the UK, the Ministry of Defense had estimated that this mission for the UK alone will cost about 1% of GDP, both because of the expenses and commitment of the mission, and because if you're going to be playing this zero-sum game, it means you need to grow the Canadian Armed Forces in order to be able to backfill for places where you're pulling troops out. So is the Prime Minister willing to take the political, financial, and reputational risk with Canadians to make that sort of a commitment in order for Canada to regain a voice at the table in terms of shaping regional and international security affairs?
I mean, Canada's already looking at growing its spending on the military to try and reach that new NATO target of 5%, even reaching our old NATO target of 2% by the end of this fiscal year. Would an operation like this go towards helping with that goal?
Well, the problem is the goal is for 2030 for the Canadian Armed Forces to be able to engage in large maneuver combat warfare operations. So there is an ambition by the government to get there. I would say that 5 years is a very short time frame to make up for 25 years of effectively having only shrunk the organization in terms of capabilities, in terms of personnel, and in terms of finances. And so you can read into that saying that Canada could make a contribution, but could Canada help to provide the sort of robust security guarantees that Zelensky is talking about under current conditions? I'm not sure. But Canada can bring a lot of things that would be required, in particular headquarters capacity, which is always in short supply. But when you provide the headquarters, you have to do basically what we did in Latvia, which is you have to show up more or less with half a brigade or brigade-size strength. And that capability simply doesn't exist relative to all the other commitments Canada has already made.
Could it be that there might be an arrangement where maybe another NATO country helps alleviate our, lack of troops in Latvia if we were to move those troops down into Ukraine in a situation like this?
So that's one possibility that Canada steps up. I mean, Canada has trained troops in Ukraine since 2015, and there were 3 countries that were there from the beginning. And those 3 countries, I think, hold a lot of the credit for why Ukraine has been able to hold out against Russia in the first place, right? So those countries were Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States, notably no European Union member country. So it is possible that, for instance, a country that has partnered with us for a long time in Latvia, such as Spain, might be prepared to backfill. The problem is the United States has already said they will not provide ground troops. They will only provide strategic enablers. So this is essentially Donald Trump's gambit to say, if you Europeans say that Ukraine is actually this important for your security, and of course it is, and it is equally important for Canada and Canadian interests to provide stability, then you're ultimately going to have to step up and you're going to have to do it. And of course, we've had 3 years where Canada and European allies have not been willing to take the political commitment and provide the military and financial support that would be able to keep Ukraine in that fight on their own. That is to say, we've always counted on U.S. support, and the U.S. has made it very clear that they are tiring of support for Ukraine and their priorities lie elsewhere, in particular the Indo-Pacific. So this is Donald Trump saying, if you're going to be talking about all this peace and all the stability you want and all the nice things you want for Ukraine, put your money and your capabilities where your mouth is. And I think it puts the Prime Minister and European allies in quite the interesting quandary.
So would this operation essentially be like a peacekeeping role? Are there more risks than normal peacekeeping roles? How would you describe what this operation would look like? Should it go ahead? Should we get some sort of ceasefire to allow for this to occur?
So let's be serious. This is not going to be a peacekeeping mission. I don't know, but I've observed Vladimir Putin for 3 years. We've all observed him in recent months. This does not look like a man who's interested in making peace. So even if there is a ceasefire, I would say that we have zero trust in the Russians, and the Ukrainians has absolutely no trust in the Russians. If you have no trust in your opponent, then by definition, you're not going to have a peacekeeping mission. Because what you're effectively going to have is a disengagement mission that is going to be somewhat similar to what you see in North or South Korea. But I think the closest analogy is probably East and West Germany during the Cold War and the division of the country. So it means that there's going to be quite the robust engagement by allies will be the only acceptable terms, I think, to Ukraine in order to engage in first a ceasefire and some sort of negotiations for a more stable outcome. So the idea that we're going to send a few hundred Canadian troops unarmed into Ukraine to somehow keep a peace where there is no peace to keep because there's no trust to be had in one of the adversaries that, of course, started this war of aggression, I think is rather naive.
More on the big story in just a moment with Christian Leuprecht, a professor at the Royal Military College and editor of the Canadian Military Journal.
If you're shopping while working, eating, or even listening to this podcast, then you know and love the thrill of a deal. But are you getting the deal and cash back? Rakuten shoppers do. They get the brands they love, savings, and cash back. And you can get it too. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Levi's, Plow and Hearth, Adidas, Sephora, and Neiman Marcus. Stack sales on top of cash back and feel what it's like to know you're maximizing the savings. And it's easy to use. And you get your cash back sent to you through PayPal or check. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cashback. Download the free Rakuten app or go to Rakuten.com to start saving today. It's the most rewarding way to shop. That's Rakuten. Rakuten.com.
So what are the risks then for our soldiers? I think you touched on it a little bit there, but what are the risks for our soldiers if they are put in the ground in a situation like this? And what would the political risks then be for the government?
Well, we've seen a situation like this before, right? We've seen, for instance, when we ran into the Balkan crisis in the 1990s and we sent troops that were hopelessly ill-equipped and ill-trained for the mission that they were engaging in. And so if we remember our history, it means we need to make sure the Canadian Armed Forces are properly equipped for this type of mission. I would say that we can barely sustain the mission in Latvia. I'm not sure how equipped and ready we are to sustain that sort of a mission in Ukraine. However, this is not a new conversation. The United Kingdom has quietly been leading this charge on coordinating this type of mission for the last 5 or so months. And the chiefs of defense staff, so there is a reasonably concrete and robust plan. But the plan is certainly a whole lot more than a peacekeeping operation that people are talking about. And it has not been revealed what Canada's role would be in that plan. But clearly, every ally is going to be required to step up because, of course, part of the security guarantees is going to be having as many capable allies as possible, providing those guarantees to signal to Putin that if he does attack Ukraine, then of course he'd be in a war effectively with most NATO ally members. But of course, this is an insurance policy. We don't want to cash in on this policy. And so it means we need to equip our soldiers properly precisely because we don't want to have to make good on cashing in the insurance policy. And so that's going to mean a significant scaling up and a rapid scaling up of the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of capabilities and in terms of people. And all that at a time when the Prime Minister is facing a structural deficit upwards of $60 billion. He's already looking to cut a number of other government departments. So I think it'll be interesting how we explain this to Canadians. But of course, as I always like to say, look, as Canadians, we love to complain the world that we live in. We complain about Donald Trump. We complain about all this instability in the world. But really, this is the world that we created. Because for 25 years, we've said, we're not really going to invest in this. We're really going to leave international security up to the Americans. And so if we don't like leaving international security up to the Americans, if we don't like the world that we live in today, then, and if we don't just simply want to be in a position where we're constantly reacting, but where we actually get back to what Canada used to do, of course, in particular in the aftermath of the Second World War, which is to shape the world in our interests as a middle power, it means we're going to have to invest. And so it'll be interesting. Is the Prime Minister going to be able to explain to Canadians why territorial integrity, political stability, economic prosperity, and social harmony in Europe is ultimately in Canada's interests? Because we know what happens when any of those are compromised. We just need to look at the first half of the 20th century. And as one of my colleagues always likes to say, the Europeans like to fight their wars right down to the last Canadian.
Just to clarify, so the big, larger risk here is that we go in out of hopes of keeping the peace. However, there's always that risk that Russia engages and then we're wrapped up in a war with Russia that we have so far avoided being involved in. Is that correct?
Right, and we will be subject to Russian hybrid warfare activities regardless. I mean, the moment our troops are going to show up, it's going to be similar to what we're currently experiencing in the Baltics, where effectively our troops are and our partner countries under daily attack by Russia. It's just not kinetic missile attacks, even though Russia, of course, has that capability not far from the border. So this is going to be, if you want, a hostile environment for Canada and allies to engage in. This is not going to be some sort of happy place. And of course, Ukraine, I think this is lost on most Europeans, but it is not lost on Canadians. It is a huge country. We're going to have to secure 1,000-kilometer frontier. You're not going to do that with a few troops that sort of drive around in a few jeeps every now and then. This is a very serious commitment, not to be underestimated. And the risks are going to be quite substantial, in part because Russia has, of course, shown that it is quite prepared to do whatever it needs to do, including changing the European security and stability order of 75 years in order to get its way.
The prime minister made these comments not ruling out a deployment of troops to Ukraine while he was in Ukraine meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. But a part of that also came with new commitments from Canada, such as, drones. I mean, the money has already been set aside and was announced at the G7 when Zelensky came to visit Canada, when we hosted that in Alberta and Kananaskis. But what do you think about the equipment commitments that Canada's made? Are they the right ones for what Ukraine needs right now?
Look, there's one new announcement that was made on the Prime Minister's visit. We signed a customs agreement with Ukraine. This is why Canada is not being taken seriously by allies. This is why the Prime Minister and Canada are so alone in the world. Because what we do constantly is re-announce things that we've already announced months ago, in some cases years ago, and money that had long been committed. And so we make those same announcements repeatedly in the hopes that sort of, I think this is largely for domestic consumption so that the electorate thinks that Canada is actually doing something. Canada has been an important supporter of Ukraine. It has provided significant financial support, and it has done that in grants rather than loans. So by and large, much of the money Canada's committed is not repayable, which is unlike many of our allies. Canada has provided some military support, and there's now good coordination among allies in terms of who provides what. There's a central capability where Ukraine makes requests, and then different allies figure out who's going to take up which type of requests. The problem is, of course, we've had 3 years of too little to live and too much to die for Ukraine. And so these sort of, this little trickle of announcements, a little bit here and there, is not going to ultimately make a key difference on the ground. But the timing is, of course, important because we need to demonstrate to Russia that allies are going to stand behind Ukraine for the indefinite future with its fight, because that's how we strengthen Ukraine's hand in the negotiations. Ukraine is going to get at the short end of the stick if Trump and Putin both see that effectively Ukraine has no support from anyone else. If they see that there is robust support from allies to Ukraine, while the U.S. disengages in some of its support, and Trump can take and leverage that to try to get Putin to cut a deal, Ukraine is going to be much better positioned to cut a much better deal.
All right, and I want to circle back to Donald Trump a little bit about what you said earlier about Trump saying he's not going to put troops on the ground, but if other countries want to, then go ahead. Trump wants there to be a ceasefire deal. He's boasted that he's able to do this, and some have said it's all in an effort to try and get a Nobel Peace Prize. But nonetheless, he has made it his mission to try and get a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and he's held meetings with both sides to try and achieve that. If Canada's a part of that group to try and secure peace or hold it, should there be a ceasefire deal, would that be beneficial when it comes to other issues with the U.S., mainly around our trade and security talks that haven't been as fruitful as some may have hoped up until this point?
So Canada is never necessarily conspicuous by its presence, but Canada is always conspicuous by its absence. So absolutely, in terms of our engagement with the United States, supporting U.S. security interests, in particular so the U.S. can pull out its resources and allocate them somewhere else where the U.S. believes that they're going to get better payoff for those resources, is always going to curry favor. And I always like to say that Canada is significant by its insignificance. What we are currently showing up on the international radar, not just in Washington, but you remember the Prime Minister's trip to France and to the United Kingdom shortly after getting elected, where I think he heard the same refrain, is what is Canada actually doing? What is Canada prepared to commit? And so the challenge is we've shown up on the international radar as being significant by not making commitments, by not coming through, by not being there for our allies on defense industrial investments, and on energy resilience, the things that our allies have asked for the past decade. So if the Prime Minister wants to reestablish our voice at the table, then it ultimately, the engagement in NATO, the commitments to NATO, the potential commitment to Ukraine is very much also ensuring that Canada has a voice in Washington and Canada has a voice around the table at NATO, because although you might have 32 members, not everybody has the same type of leverage and has the same type of voice. And it's ultimately about, do we want to have a say in what's happening in Europe? And do we want to make sure we're being taken seriously by the Trump administration?
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Thanks so much for all of your thoughts on this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was Christian Leuprecht, professor at the Royal Military College and editor of the Canadian Military Journal. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.